Welcome back. My name is Jason Spees. This is the Crude Life podcast and network. Of course, we have Dustin Gawrylow joining us with the Watchdog Network. How are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good, Jason.
Thank you for joining us here. And what's going on in your neck of the woods with the COVID-19 shutdown? I mean, you're kind of a home office guy to begin with, so transition, I imagine, was somewhat easy, but...
Yeah, I mean, here in Bismarck, we've had basically the restaurants have converted to delivery and takeout only, like everywhere else in the country. And then beyond that, stores are still open and have been fairly busy whenever I've been out and about. And for the most part, traffic is down, but not significantly at certain times of day. You'd think that. I think that what happens is that a lot of people get tired of sitting at home and they got to go out and drive around a little bit and burn up some gas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, being one of the border states, the governor, of course, he doesn't want people out there traveling. He mentioned the Dakotas, and you've got Minnesota that's shut down. And so it's kind of interesting, you being in the center, being away from some of the more border towns and everything where, you've got a little bit less activity. I know on the east side in Fargo, man, it's like a ghost town in that town.
Yeah, it's definitely not a ghost town here. I mean, I think every guy on motorcycle's been out in the last 48 hours because the streets are finally dry. And you've got a lot of people just out and about, and, they don't have anything to do. They're not going to work. They may have been left to stay at home, but they're doing whatever they can to fill the time and get out in the sun. I think, it's kind of tough to keep North Dakotans in houses during the spring, after a long winter. So, that's kind of a tough challenge to convince people that they should stay inside.
Oil and gas is one of the essential businesses when it comes to the COVID-19 shutdown and the coronavirus in terms of no matter what state you're in, it seems like the governor has pretty much deemed that essential. In the Bakken, it's been a little different, with prices the way they have and the demand side of things as well. And then all of a sudden, it's a little different in the state of North Dakota because, boy, I want to check. I think we had a guest on, Brent Boger from Jadestone Consulting, and I think he had somewhere like 55% of the state's budget. At least that's the numbers I've been spouting on the program. So are you still kind of tracking what's going on there? Being the Watchdog Network you are. I know that you're a lot more active when it comes to kind of a legislative and political season. But how are my numbers there on that 55%? And do you kind of know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the state of North Dakota's budget and the revenues tied to those oil and gas taxes?
Yeah, 55 would definitely be on the high side, but it's not too extremely high. You've got the money that has come in over the years, and the oil tax revenue itself is one piece of it, and I believe the general fund general fund equivalent spending pulls about $1.5 billion directly from oil money. And then you've got, I believe, 30% of the sales tax is attributed to oil activity and other activities that are indirectly linked to oil. And then you've got the entire, all the other auxiliary revenues that are created by those people being here, which also includes sales tax, but includes income tax and other taxes at the local level. And so it's definitely a huge piece of the puzzle. And what we're seeing with both the price declines and the production declines already kicking in, within the last week, Lynn Helms announced that something like 140,000 barrels of oil in production were reduced because wells were being shut in, and something like another 200,000 barrels would also be reduced in the next couple months as a function of the fact that prices are coming down. And so, between the price that's being taxed and the amount of oil that is being produced, the state's oil tax revenue is going to drastically decline. And I think that if everything holds up the way that it is, we'll probably be below 1 million barrels a day by midsummer, and that is going to have a severe impact on the situation for North Dakota, and that's why I've been predicting that we'll probably have a special session mid-July sometime, long enough after the planting season is done, and hopefully people can congregate in groups more than 10 by then, but not too late that interferes with harvest time. So, you've got significant cuts that are coming down the road. I don't think anybody is acknowledging just how bad it's going to be. I've noticed in the last couple of days that there are finally some other media voices saying, we should probably look at a special session. And from what I've been able to tell about Doug Burgum, he's just trying to get past this medical situation first and then get into the economics of it. But, we've got a twofold issue. Not only do we have the virus to contend with, but even if we didn't have that, the oil prices have collapsed so drastically that we would even require a special session without the virus, because this oil collapse has been worse than the 2014-15 collapse. So, we're heading for some drastic changes in how we operate, and hopefully with this being the second time that oil has collapsed in the last 5 years, our lawmakers will finally realize that it's not a good idea to put oil even into the mix at all. I mean, in my analysis, I think that our budget going forward should not even calculate oil into the ongoing budget. It should only be basically the gravy on top. That, if we have it, we're going to use it for X, Y, and Z, but we're not going to count on it being there to run our government.
How about when it comes to Whiting Petroleum's recent announcement of the bankruptcy in it's a Chapter 11, I think. I'm not really quite sure what kind of impact that has with the oil and gas taxes, I guess, but I know that some people are asking the question if one thing has anything to do with the other.
Well, I think that the taxes are not necessarily a downward driver for the companies at this point. The price is so low that the tax is irrelevant. It's just a marginal issue at this point. But as far as what Whiting's bankruptcy, and there's probably going to be more bankruptcies coming down the road for sure. What that's going to do is determine whether they're going to continue to produce or not. And once they go into bankruptcy, there's I don't know how it works, but there might be a situation where the court insists that they keep producing as a means to keep cash flowing. So that might actually be a detriment to the overall oil production numbers in the world. I saw earlier today that ExxonMobil announced that they're going to cut their own production by 30% in the next year, and that they expect the industry to cut significantly as well. So that will end up in a 1 to 2 year window stabilizing things, because there won't be as much supply going into tanks, but there's also not as much demand right now to burn it up. So the overall picture on the industry is midterm probably not that great yet. The most optimistic numbers that I've seen is that maybe 3 to 5 years out we finally level off and are past this point. But the bigger picture for public policy is that our elected officials need to realize that money is not guaranteed, that the industry and the market is so topsy-turvy that using that as a long-term sustainable revenue source is just not a reasonable or prudent approach anymore.
I guess when I take a look at this, I'm thinking of the projections that states do when it comes to taxes and funding. And then I think about the reality of not only oil prices, but in this instance, you had the Saudi Arabia, Russia, OPEC thing, and then come on the other side with the coronavirus shock. So it was really a 1-2 punch. And then I think about all the school incentives that are involved with a lot of these different taxes, whether it be from the county level, from a sales tax, or whether it be from a state level. Is there been any talk at all around Bismarck that you're hearing about? I've got requests out to the different organizations, and I've had a request into Burgum's office now for several months, since probably December, to talk about this, because I don't know. I think it's an issue. I mean, it seemed like it was a few years ago when they were paying all those taxes. Now it would seem like if they're not going to pay the taxes, it would be a bigger issue, if you know what I mean. I mean, a couple of years ago, after the study was done, man, it seems like they were telling everybody how much taxes oil and gas were. But now it's like you can't hardly find anybody. So I just didn't know. I appreciate you coming on, because I know you follow this stuff. So just kind of curious about that whole thing. And you think special session might be coming in July, though, huh?
That would be my guess. I mean, it could be different. It could be late June. It could be early August. But it's going to be in that range sometime during summer. Because, when you've got massive reductions in revenue, the sooner that you start taking spending off the table, the less painful it is going to be on a month-by-month basis. We've got a full year left of the biennium. Our budget cycle is July 1st to July 1st 2 years later. So our biennium ends July 1, or the fiscal year ends July 1, so we will have a full year left in the biennium. And being able to divide those budget cuts over 12 months is going to be a lot less painful than dividing those budget cuts over 8 or 6 months. And, even though you've got the regular session coming up in January, you want to hit this stuff sooner rather than later. And the governor has the ability to allocate certain percentages, but I think that at this point, it should be more of a rebudgeting than an allocation situation, that the legislature should come back and look at their own numbers and determine where they're really at and whether that is where they want to be. And, that way it does two things. It's no longer just up to the governor, and that theoretically will make fewer people upset. And secondly, the legislature can take ownership of their overspending over the years and get things in line, and basically, the more that they cut during this next, during the special session, the less that they have to cut in January as well for the next biennium, which is going to be significantly lower. I would guess 25 to 30% lower next biennium than this biennium, and you've got to get in there early to take care of that, or else you are really just setting yourself up for trouble down the road.
How about when it comes to the east-west side of things? I know that's been an issue in the past, to the tune to where they several times tried to pass, and I think this last time they passed something called Prairie Dog.
Yes.
Operation Prairie Dog, and they, like I said, they've tried before of Western stimulus and some other things. Is that get impacted at all, affected at all during this whole thing? I know that they were trying to make sure that the western side of the states were not forgotten. And given the new state of events and the population disparity, I just have to raise that question. Is that talked about at all? And have you thought of that, I guess?
Well, the Prairie Dog bill was designed to put money into cities that had not gotten surge money, and to spread it out from the West and make it more even statewide. My guess is that the oil prices and production levels are going to make the overall allocation and appropriation from the Prairie Dog bill pretty much minimal, if anything at all, because of the way that was set up. It was fairly convoluted, the way that formula worked out. And one of the things that they didn't want to do was spend money before they had it in the bank. So I think that you're going to see less impact from that than people thought. It probably will kick some cash in for construction this time around. At one of the press conferences last week, we heard Burgum actually use the B word, which is bonding, which is the state going in debt to generate some cash to do some infrastructure work. And he was saying it because we've got ultra low interest rates. The state could probably take out some bonded debt at under 2%, and maybe even do what a lot of people, including myself, have wanted, which is utilize the Bank of North Dakota as an infrastructure bank more than it has been. We've got it. It has certain things that it could do. The legislature could allocate certain money, say the earnings from the legacy fund, to paying down the debt that they bond out. And with $100 million a year in payments, they could bond out $1 billion in bonded debt and have that to spend now and pay it off in under 11 years at 2% rate, or maybe under 12 years. So you're at a situation where we should probably be looking at that, but you don't want to go into debt to prop up government. The only debt that you should be taking on is debt that is true infrastructure debt that's going to go into roads or bridges that are going to last 50 to 80 years. And, then you also have to take into account that the federal government's going to come in with their own infrastructure bill. And frankly, we might need to bond out just to have matching funds to take advantage of those federal dollars as well. So there's a lot of pieces that are going to be moving that the legislature's not used to, because, man, I don't know that we've taken out new debt in North Dakota since the early 90s. So that's going to be a new feature that is not common in the last generation of lawmakers.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and talk about some of this, because it's showing once again that pretty much everything's being put on the table in terms of what is a solution. And it's kind of interesting, I'm taking a look at the different states, and with North Dakota just operating business as usual, it's different. It's almost like, once again, North Dakota's in that bubble again. During the Bakken boom and the rest of the country was going through like a little bit of a recession, North Dakota was doing really good, them in Texas.
Yeah, well, and North Dakota's always in a bubble. We're always counter-cyclical to the rest of the country. You remember the 08-09 Great Recession with the financial collapse nationwide and worldwide. North Dakota was immune from that for two reasons. One, the boom was starting. But number two, our subprime loan market was already socialized back in the late 80s. During the farm crisis, the Bank of North Dakota was put into a position of buying mortgages that were otherwise considered subprime. And so we had already socialized that market. So there was no problem with private banks collapsing due to giving out loans to people who shouldn't have them. If there were any loans, they were already owned by the Bank of North Dakota. And that basically leveled things out and prevented a bailout, because we'd already done the bailout back in the 80s.
So with that being said, there's really a lot of different things that are on the table when it comes to the different solutions and different ideas that are out there. And the one thing that that does concern me, though, is, as I mentioned, I brought up the prairie dog for a reason. Is that it's been a historical battle trying to get resources allocated to the western side of the state, to the tune to where they actually had to create a bill for it. The East has got a water project that they're not letting go of, and Minnesota doesn't. Every day it seems like they're going to help less and less with the finances, and so it's either up to the feds or it's up to the state. And it just seems like with the universities on the eastern side of the state, and now with energy the way it's at, boy, I'd hate to see the West get their back turned on once again. What are your thoughts on that water project on the eastern side of the state causing any ruffles in this?
Well, I do believe that if we have a $2 trillion infrastructure bill, that it's going to be on the backs of both Senator Hoeven because of his seniority and Senator Kramer because of his connection with President Trump, to include in there a significant amount of money for the Red River Diversion Project, and maybe the whole thing. If we're going to be spending multiple trillions of dollars on infrastructure, that project needs to be in there. And I would say that if that project is not in there, then that's a major problem for the people of North Dakota, because if we're going in debt nationally, $2 trillion, and not getting at least something like that out of the deal, that we got the short end of the stick nationally. As far as what the West is going to have to deal with going forward, if the state does not have the cash to buy down and reduce the cost to local government, those local governments are going to have to raise their mill levies, raise their sales tax, and become high tax cities, which may work during boom times when everybody's flush with cash, but when people are leaving the state again because they don't know how long this next bust is going to last, they're right back in the same position that they were in the 80s, repeating history over and over and over and never learning from it.
Well, and that's where I'm a little bit concerned. I don't know if Bismarck quite has a grasp on what's going on outside of Bismarck, because, in Fargo, like I said, not only the restaurants closed, but, the malls are closed. Macy's, I mean, there's a national story about whether Macy's is even going to reopen or not. I've had conversations with people around town that they're pretty well convinced that 30 to 40% of the restaurants are never going to open their doors again. And these are real conversations with people in our community that we know. And it's a little bit different. And, talking to you, people are moving around, and yeah, restaurants aren't busy, but they're still doing, delivery and drive-through and things like that. So I kind of look at it where, the rest of the world is kind of shut down a little bit. And so there's going to be a little bit of a ripple that comes from this as well. Has that been, have you heard anything about that around Bismarck at all? Just the kind of, a little bit different. You got a lot more activity in the center of the state. You get near the borders and there's like none.
Yeah, I think that one situation that had been already brewing was a glut in commercial real estate, even before this situation. Last year, I was already talking to some of my donors, and they were saying that there is just too many square foot of commercial real estate in Bismarck. And I think that what you're talking about with closings of malls, stores, restaurants, Bismarck might be somewhat insulated from that. It's not completely, but nationally, you're going to see an absolute collapse in commercial real estate. It's probably going to be the commercial equivalent of what happened in 08, 09. And that's going to come down the road because the rents and leases are still in effect. And once those are either lapsed or the tenants bail out of them one way or another, you're going to see a very drastic change in that market. And that's going to lead to a lot of repurposing and all that. But I would say Bismarck is insulated. I mean, in January, our Park District put through the city of Bismarck a half-cent sales tax that would allow the Park District to bond out $120 million for a brand new rec center. Taj Mahal Rec Center on the north side of town. And, I've been talking to folks that have been supportive of that, which include a lot of conservatives that are usually against every spending and tax measure. But, I tell them, is this really appropriate when the economy is collapsing and we're literally going into an era where being around other people is frowned upon? And they say, oh, yeah, don't worry, it'll blow over. Well, I think that culturally that it's not going to blow over. People are going to find more ways to do things independently. They're going to now value the time that they had. People don't understand how little free time they have in life until they have actual free time. And people are, I believe, the rat race is going to slow down a little bit, and people are going to start valuing their time more than that extra 10% on the paycheck. And you're going to see a situation where that is going to start affecting the economy on a long-term basis, because people are going to want leisure time, want to take the weekend off, or take a 4-day weekend instead of a 3, and it's going to incrementally pile up and pile up. And people are going to be looking for ways to get away from the crowds because they're wanting that independence. And I think that any local government that right now has a measure on the ballot that would create more spending or more taxes has to really reevaluate that and determine whether they want that to be a downward driver on their economic growth in the future. When 6 months ago, a half-cent sales tax would not have been a problem with the economy. Now it might be.
How about for your organization? How are you making money these days? I know that you're a home office guy, so you are somewhat of a transitional person. But talk to me about how you're making money and staying afloat these days during the COVID-19 shutdown. So basically, a plug so people can give you some of their business.
Well, we raise money. One way that they can do it is they can go to our website at watchingnd.com. We have not put a big push on our donors because, for the most part, they're small donors who, can throw in $100 here and there. But those folks are hurting. They're wondering where their next meal is going to come from, or their next paycheck, or they're trying to get their unemployment for whatever. With a lot of them are self-employed, and even the wealthy donors that we have, they've got businesses, they've got employees that they're trying to keep solvent. And, one of them said 6 weeks he can handle as far as paying his people to do nothing. But after that, it gets tough. And so we're trying to be reasonable on that and, basically hold off on any big asks until these folks can figure out their own personal situations. Over the last several years, I've gotten into the Uber driving business so that I'm not relying on the generosity of donors 100%. And so I'm in that same crowd with a lot of people. And so as a result, I've been keeping an eye on what the state has been doing as far as this new benefit that the feds have through Congress approved, which would give unemployment benefits to self-employed 1099 Schedule C type people. And just basically doing what I can, knowing that other people are probably in much worse situations, and we got to be reasonable and measured with what we ask of other people, knowing that everybody's in a hurt situation right now.